I was feeling called to do a different topic today, something more along the lines of habits and how do we change them. So that's what I want to talk about today. We can talk about whatever you want to talk about. Usually I come on and talk about boundaries, family conflict, things like that, but I do think that having this type of topic related to changing habits is actually really strongly related to the topic of family dynamics and relationship dynamics. Because in order to build healthier relationships, what we're actually doing is we're actually trying to build new habits. And and this is why I talk so much about the practices that I have available because and I call them practices because it really takes you changing your habits in order to live a better life, in order to live a life where you suffer less. So this goes for every level of whatever you're trying to change, whether it's a small habit or whether it's a really big habit, whether it is like you're trying to drink more water or whether it is you're trying to show up differently in relationships. You're trying to build healthier relationships. So that's why I wanted to talk about the changing habits topic because it actually is related to family dynamics because everything related to family dynamics that I talk about and relationship dynamics has to do with you, the self. And how do you master yourself? And so that's why I think it's important to talk about this on even the micro level because if you haven't changed a habit yet, there is something that you're not accepting within yourself about why that thing is happening still. And it's really important to be able to reflect on those things. And I find that changing habits actually comes down to something very different than the habit itself, which is that you're changing who you are fundamentally. But before you do that, you do have to accept who you are in the present, understand who you are in the present, and even feel the feelings that you have been suppressing so that you can fully accept who you are in the present, meaning that you can accept all the hard parts of yourself that you haven't really acknowledged. So that's why I wanted to talk about this topic because it's really important. And I'm curious what habits you're trying to change, what you've tried, what you're struggling with. What are you struggling with when it comes to changing yourself? Changing habits is not just like a little thing, it's actually a change in the self. And it goes beyond just wanting to change that habit and it really speaks to the person that you're trying to become and your belief as to whether it's possible to be that person or how quickly it's possible to be that person is driving the potential inability to change that habit. So I want to know, what are you struggling with? Please share in the chat. What is it that's going on for you? What is it that is feeling challenging for you? I think that one of the things that comes up a lot in terms of, let's talk about relationship dynamic habits. A few of the things that come up pretty regularly that I see are perfectionism habits. Tell me in the chat if you have perfectionism issues. You can just put like a little heart or you can say me. If you struggle with perfectionism, put it in the chat because that's a lot of people. Perfectionism is a habit. The cool thing about changing who we are is that really what we're doing is simply changing our habits. So if you have oh, AC said, yeah, oh, hey, AC, good to see you. Yes. Yep, yep, yep. And what about people pleasing? Guess what? That's another habit. Like we think, you know what's interesting, especially with something like people pleasing, I guess, and or perfectionism too. We sort of label ourselves these things as if they're just who we are and we can't change. Like we're like, oh, I'm a people pleaser or I'm a perfectionist. So that's why this thing matters so much to me or whatever it is, right? Like we almost like jokingly label ourselves as these things. And even when you do that jokingly, you put a label on yourself that you can't get out of. That's why I'm a big anti-label person. Even like what people think are positive labels, like empath, like highly sensitive person, even diagnoses I don't like as labels. I think that they can be really helpful in explaining your experience of the world. And there is truth in that. And I think that there is something to be said for exploring who you are as a person beyond a label. And I speak from my own experience as having experience with OCD and anxiety. Like people just use these terms so casually, like, oh, I have OCD, or I'm OCD about XYZ, or I have anxiety, or even I'm autistic. And maybe that is a controversial one because, again, I do think that there's benefit in these labels at first, where we can explain our experience of our own world. I think a lot of people experience a level of relief in finding a label that fits. And by the way, I mean this too, like in labels that we label other people: narcissist, gaslighter, manipulative, toxic. These are particular labels that we typically label other people. We're typically not associating those things with ourselves. Sometimes we are, but not often. And the thing is that I think that whenever we're using labels, and feel free to respond to the prompt here, my dears, or respond to anything that I'm saying. Thank you, Musima, for the, oh, I see. Okay. Welcome, everybody. Okay. So, yeah, labels that we label ourselves and other people are not super helpful because they put us in a box where we can't get out of the box. We can't get out of that experience and experience something different for our lives. I think anxiety is one that is a really good example of this. If you describe yourself as just an anxious person, or I'm really anxious, or I have anxiety, or I have social anxiety, then you're never going to be able to have an experience of life beyond that. You've already put the label, boom, this is who I am. So now it's not going to be possible at all for you to have any type of other experience of your life than anxiety. And coming from experience, anxiety is something that you don't have to live with forever. Yes, it comes up in normal, natural ways, and sometimes we get triggered and it comes up. But when you have the tools, you know what to do when it comes up. So even if you like dip down into like some anxiety, some fear, which anxiety is just fear, then you know how to get yourself back up. That's why I'm such a proponent of the tools that I teach, which are on my YouTube channel that you can find for free. Feeling and feelings practice, feeling anger and rage practice. Because again, these are just habits. What I'm advocating for is for us to change our habits. Thank you, I am Soniac, for the follow. So questions do you have, or what habits do you want to change? We can go back to the ones that I mentioned, which were perfectionism and people pleasing. So first of all, I suppose my first point of today's session is stop labeling yourself. Anxiety. Okay, anxiety. Yeah, let's talk about that. Because what anxiety is a habit. It's a habit of seeing the things around you that you perceive you need fixing. My ex said something to me about it this weekend. Okay. Do you feel comfortable sharing any more specifics about like what exactly you're struggling with? Because I'm sure, I mean, honestly, I think the word anxiety gets thrown around so much in our culture nowadays. It's almost like normalized that we assume that we're anxious and a lot of other people are anxious. We kind of joke about it sometimes. And I think even those things mean that we don't think it's possible to access a level of beingness where we are not anxious. Okay. Being anxious. Yes. Well, okay. So, okay. Never having time to myself and people thinking they can hit me because I won't do what they want me to do. Okay. Physically hit you because that's really problematic. Um, and you should never be spending any time with people that are physically hurting you, my dear. So let's get yourself out of that situation. Is that currently happening, or is that something from your past? Um, because if you're physically in danger, yeah, my dear, then this is a bigger issue. This is a bigger issue. Of course you have anxiety if you're in physical danger. So I'm not sure that this is really the right discussion for you in the sense that the issue is bigger if you're currently being physically harmed. You should not be spending time around people who physically harm you, period. Period. So as hard as it is, you do need to remove yourself from those environments. Um, because it sounds to me like perhaps like if we're talking about habits, your habit might be people pleasing. If you're choosing to stay in environments, and I'm assuming you're an adult, if you're choosing to stay in environments where you're being physically harmed, then my dear, I would suggest that you get some additional assistance. I would suggest that you get additional assistance in terms of, therapist, in terms of any other supports for people in your situation, because it's not something that I am an expert in any way. So I can't claim to know exactly what you need. You can find pretty cheap therapists on BetterHelp who are also willing to, you can get like a financial discount on there. And then some therapists are also willing to work with you on the price. So I honestly, I don't think I don't think that costs, I think you can always find a way to get help. And saying that you can't afford it, but you need to afford it. You need to afford help of some kind. So use your intuition and decide what kind of help that you need to get. Because I don't think that this is gonna, I'm just not, I don't have experience. in that field. So I can't claim to have any type of assistance for you, my darling, but you definitely should not be engaging with individuals that physically harm you. But get help. You can't do this alone. Nobody can do this thing called life alone. No, no, we can't do it alone. So find safe spaces where you can figure out what your next steps are. So let's go back to habits, because as a matter of fact, anxiety, the thing that it is intended for, are situations for when you're actually in danger. So of course you're going to feel anxious when you actually are in danger physically. That's not a problem. Anybody saying that that's a problem is not somebody that's going to be a helpful individual for you. Because they're not in a place where they're going to be able to prioritize your well-being. Now, when anxiety is a problem is when it starts to affect your life, when there is nothing that is physically a problem for you. There is nothing that is there to physically harm you. And when it becomes like all consuming. We all know the experience of anxiety where you have ruminating thoughts, you can't stop thinking about something. Typically this shows up within relationships. This shows up as ruminating on what the other person is thinking or feeling. And so that is actually a habit. And it takes time to change habits like this because they're so ingrained in us and they're so taught by society. So we have to have intentional tools to change these types of habits. Because what rumination is doing when you're constantly ruminating about something, you are it's a form of people pleasing in a sense. Because what you're doing is putting the other person before yourself. You're exploring out of a place of fear the other person's experience of what's going on before you even explore your own. So that looks like constantly trying to figure out how they're feeling, what they're doing, what they're thinking, analyzing what they've said, analyzing the text messages, trying to figure out what you should say or do, how you're going to fix it. So the habit that we need to start changing when it comes to anxiety is we need to actually start putting aside this question of what do I do about this situation and actually feel into what am I feeling about this situation? Because I can guarantee you there's probably fear. There's probably potentially anger, disappointment, confusion, sadness. But we don't know what to do with those types of emotions. So our mind just focuses on trying to fix the situation. Fix a situation that, by the way, can't be fixed because your mind is really, really good at solving problems when it has all the information. Your mind is really good about making decisions about like what appliance to buy, right? Because you know your needs and what type of appliance you need. You can go Google search and figure out what's out there in the market. And then you can put those things together because you have all the information. But when it comes to relationships, you don't have all the information. So your mind is trying to solve a problem, solve a puzzle where it doesn't have all the information. That's what happens when we ruminate. Because of course we're going to go around and round and round and round in circles because there's no answer to the questions we're asking. There's no answer because we don't have all the information. We never can have all the information when it comes to relationships because we're only one half of them. Lisa said, love it to I am Sonic for. Hey, Sylvie. Good to see you, my dear. Thanks for joining. So, rumination, in a sense, is a habit. Hey, my dear. Hold on a second. Let me take a drink of water. Also, my foot's falling asleep. Oh, God, my whole leg. Okay. Yeah, let me know if you have any questions in the chat or let me know about changing habits. Right now, I'm talking about anxiety as it relates to being a habit. I don't think that we often think about anxiety as a habit because we think of anxiety as just being we think of ourselves almost as victims of anxiety, like it just happens, like it happens to us. And instead of thinking about it as a habit that we can change. And so that's where I want to reframe this because it is a habit and there's certain things that you're choosing out of habit. And by the way, out of um, societal teachings. It's what society has kind of taught us. It's how it's taught us to be. Why? Because society has prioritized the masculine over the feminine. So most of us have grown up in a world where the masculine, that is the doing, the fixing, the achieving, the succeeding, the accumulating. All of those things is the masculine part of us. So when we're taught to do that, those are all things that we do with our mind oftentimes. We figure out problems, we solve problems using our brain, and our brain is our masculine. Our heart is the feminine. Our feminine is being, feeling, receiving. It's much more passive rather than active. But we haven't been taught to tap into the feminine part of us, to our hearts. We haven't been taught how to feel, what to do with the hard emotions that come up, what to do in hard situations. We haven't even been taught how to have healthy relationships. So of course we're going to ruminate about them. Sylvie says, I ruminate too, hate it. Yeah, so this is a great topic then to talk about. And hopefully you can gain some insights. Because rumination, and I just you came in kind of the middle of the conversation, but what I'm saying ultimately is that rumination is our mind, our masculine, trying to solve a problem when it doesn't have all the information. So it's never going to be able to solve the problem when it comes to relationships, when it comes to hard feelings that come up between you and other people, because it doesn't have all the information. Save your mind for problems that it can actually fix. Because what happens is the rumination comes in when we worry and worry and worry and we go over and over in our mind. What we're actually trying to do is fix something that we perceive as wrong. Either something that we like said or did, some potential problem that we see in the future that we're trying to avoid. And it's in the future, so it's not actually a problem now. So our mind is like going over everything for a problem that doesn't even exist, which is why we never land on a solution because it's not actually a problem right now. So the mind is tricky, and that's where we get to change our habits. That's where we get to learn to change these habits. And the first thing that I think is so important to learn how to do is to learn how to feel. And I call it a practice, but you could call it a habit. But the practice is about connecting with our heart, getting out of our head and into our heart. If you ruminate and you don't want to ruminate anymore, by the way, rumination is another word for anxiety. Anxiety is another word for fear. So therefore, you're afraid and you don't know what to do with that fear. And the truth is, we need to learn new practices on how to simply be able to feel the fear and validate the fear. The validation is one of the most important parts because the validation is actually what you're looking for. Your mind is trying to find all the reasons why you don't need to be scared, right? Like your mind is kind of like telling you, well, maybe it's not such a big deal, or maybe I can do this, maybe I can do that, trying to find the solution around being scared of this thing. Maybe I can tell them this, maybe I can do that. If you find yourself in a place where you're trying to like find solutions in that way, you're trying to figure out what to do, that's a really great indication that you need to stop and actually feel. And my feeling of feelings practice that I have on my YouTube is how to do that. That's literally, I'm teaching you how to do that because it's probably the most foundational skill that I think every single human needs is a skill to be able to feel their feelings. I think otherwise we suffer a lot. And a lot of our suffering comes from our own inability to feel and validate our experience for ourselves. And then guess what happens? When we are in a state of fear or when we're in a state of anger, sadness, shame, guilt, overwhelm, you name it, those are all hard emotions. And when we are in a state where we are choosing those, because if you're not choosing to feel your feelings, then you're choosing to stay in those experiences. Not your fault because you don't have the practice, but now that I'm telling you there is a practice, it is your responsibility. It is your responsibility to learn how to feel those hard emotions. And it doesn't take long. I'm not advocating for you to take an hour every day out of your time to do some meditation or something. I'm telling you that there's a practice that you should do regularly when you feel hard feelings, and it only takes a handful of minutes. But it has to be a practice because we're changing habits here. And part of the hardest part, I would say, one of the hardest parts about it is in the middle of it, in the middle of the rumination, realizing, oh shoot, I'm ruminating. Because we get so caught up in it. You've got to build the habit of realizing that it's happening while it's happening. And then that is a great point to be like, I have hard feelings to feel, I need to feel my feelings. Because otherwise, what's going to happen is because you're stuck in those hard emotions, even subconsciously, you might on the surface like feel okay. So many people walk around on the surface thinking they're okay, but like subconsciously they're in one of those states of being. And therefore, you're going to make decisions that are aligned with those emotions. So you're subconsciously sabotaging your life because you're making decisions that are aligned with fear, anger, guilt, shame, sadness, confusion, overwhelm. So if you feel like your life isn't really reflecting the kind of peace that you want it to, it's probably because you're not embodying that peace yet. But that also means that it just takes some habit changes in order to embody that so that you can see it in the external world around you. Because we think the order of operations is if I think about it enough, I'll come up with a solution, I'll do the solution, it'll fix the problem, and I'll be at peace again. I just have to keep thinking about it. I just have to keep keeping it top of my mind. I have to keep going over it and over and over it. And and the order of operations actually is that you need to feel your hard feelings by yourself, with yourself, get back to a state of peace, and then make a decision about what to do. Because getting yourself back to a state of peace means that you're going to then make a decision out of peace. And that is how you build a peaceful life. Is you learn the skill to get yourself back to peace when you do fall into low vibration hard emotions. And then from a state of peace, you make the decisions about your life. It's that simple. The only thing that's missing for you is the skill of learning how to get yourself from fear, anger, sadness, shame, guilt up to peace. That's the only skill that you're missing. And once you know how to do that and you implement it, you apply it over and over and over and over and over again, then it becomes a habit. Then, right when something happens, you have the tools to know what to do to get yourself back to a state of peace and make the decision. The decision will be based on peace. What questions do you have? Because I want to make sure that I'm also answering your questions. Please write in the chat. What are your comments about what I'm saying? What are your questions? And by the way, this works for the other habits that I've mentioned here today. This works for people pleasing. If you have a habit of people pleasing, the best thing to do is to learn how to feel your feelings before you make any decisions. So it's about stopping yourself from doing anything, including, signing on to something just to please the other person and agreeing to anything, like making a commitment. It's about stopping yourself from doing those things, going and feeling your feelings about the situation, and then making a decision, because then your decision will be based on peace. And, people pleasing is simply the experience of guilt. So literally everything in your life, every experience that you have in your life can be tied back to an emotion, probably multiple emotions, but you can like, that's why, whenever people bring up things for me, I always say, like, what's the feeling behind that? Because even anxiety is not a feeling. Anxiety is a physical manifestation of fear. Anxiety is a physical manifestation sometimes of anger, disappointment, shame. The big one is fear, but all of these emotions can exist within that as well. Sylvie, thoughts on attending a funeral when you don't really care to see anyone there? There's other ways to express your condolences to somebody. If you care about expressing condolences for this person or this family, there's other ways to do that than by going to the funeral. If you feel pressure to go to the funeral, that's something I think to explore, because that could be a people pleasing thing. Like, if you feel like the only reason you'd go is because you'll feel guilty and other people expect you to be there, that could be something interesting to explore for you. Because the truth about this journey is that you will upset other people, you will disappoint other people, and on the journey of learning to choose yourself. And hard feelings come up, like guilt. It doesn't mean that the decision is wrong, even if you feel guilt about it. Sometimes, oftentimes, the right decisions come with guilt. but you choose them anyway because you choose yourself. But you have a practice, a feeling of feelings practice to be able to feel through that, because I can't just say to you like, oh, well, then just don't go to the funeral because that's what you want, right? Because then you're like, but what about all this like horrible guilt and fear that I feel, aka anxiety, about disappointing people, about people getting upset at me? Like, yeah, those are real, and you need a practice. You need a practice to be able to navigate those. Yes, I was raised with people pleasing and guilt, etc. Great insights. Okay, you're welcome, Sylvie. Yeah. Um, yeah, a lot of us were raised with those types of things too, right? Like of course it goes back to childhood where so many of us were expected to be the perfect child, and people pleasing plays into that. And by the way, that's also why perfectionism, which I brought up earlier, perfectionism being a habit, is something that is also important to change, understanding that perfectionism is fear. Because again, if I ask you, what is the feeling behind trying to make something perfect? It's a fear. Fear that it won't be perfect, fear that there'll be a consequence because it won't be perfect. Or a fear that you aren't perfect, a fear that there's a consequence because you aren't perfect, because you aren't enough, because you are lacking. And I think that a lot of people that are on their healing journey now were raised in that energy of needing to be the perfect child, right? Not like hard feelings were not acceptable. And our parents, they didn't know what to do with hard feelings either. The generations before us had no idea what they were doing in terms of emotions. So, of course, they couldn't teach us. Of course, they had emotional issues, lots of anxiety, unknowingly. And of course, they passed those things on to us. Generation by generation, I think no, I don't think I know we're doing better. But I think that what it comes down to is a desire to want a different experience for your life. Do you want to live with anxiety? Do you want to live in fear? I know that you'd probably say no, but it requires changing your habit. So, are you ready for that? What do you all want to change that you feel like you can't change? That's what I'm curious about. What is it that you want to change that you feel like you can't, that you're struggling to change? Yeah. Because I'm thinking about even smaller habits that are hard to change. And I think that sometimes, what do I want to say? I think that sometimes it's not the right time for that particular change. And I think in my own journey of like wanting to wake up earlier. Truth is, I had to let that go and fully accept what feels true for me in terms of my chronotype, the amount of sleep I need, the hours that I prefer to sleep. Hey, gorgeous hearted. And brought on a lot more peace for me. It's not the time for it to change. Maybe it never will, but maybe it will. But now's not the time. And sometimes I think that we have to allow ourselves to live in that imperfectness of whatever feels accessible for us and fully accept it as if it won't change, or at least accepting now's not the time for it to change, but maybe someday it will. So, habits are as small as that and as big as changing your entire approach to your own thoughts and your own emotions. So, if nobody has any questions, I'm probably going to leave it there for this evening, but I'll give it another minute to see if anybody has any questions for me that I can help with. And otherwise, I usually am live on Tuesdays at this time, but this week it's Wednesday. So I should be back on Tuesday next week. And doesn't look like there's other questions. Thank you, Sylvie. You too, my dear. Sending you all so much love, so much light, and I'll see you next week. Bye.